So maybe I can go ahead and start introducing this is Matt McAuliffe from the Center for Information Technology at NIH. And Matt is the responsible for several things at NIH, but he's the principal architect and technical oversight for this FITBIR, Federal Interagency Traumatic Brain Injury Research Informatics Initiative. And he also manages the development of a very large, widely used software system called MyPav, this medical image processing, analysis, and visualization software system used extensively at the NIH campus and then outside as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt McAuliffe. I'm one of the co-directors of the FITBIR informatics system, along with Ramona Hicks and Douglas Gibson from Department of Defense. And to give you a little background, I was one of the original developers of NDAR, which is the National Database for Autism Research. And so what we've done is taken the NDAR model, redesigned it a little bit, modularized it to meet other disease categories like the traumatic brain injury. But I think really Mona did a really good job of talking about this. Why do we bring all the data together? You want to be able to ask new questions, replicate experiments, to simulate, to help publish new data or new papers on data, looking at it at a different way or combining the data. Some pretty obvious stuff, but it's actually very difficult to do, to combine that data, and this is what we're trying to do with FITBIR. So FITBIR is a collaborative biomedical informatics system, and what we're trying to do is implement a system based on standards, and one of the more important standards are developing common data elements, because we believe that's kind of a cornerstone for being able to collect that data. If you have common data elements that researchers are using in collecting that data, it's much easier to put that data into a database and then to mine that data in a useful way. The old way is that you would collect the data, everyone would collect it using a different data elements that they use in their labs, and then trying to map one data set to another data set. They kind of map, they mostly map, and that proved to be problematic. Another big part of our goal is developing useful tools for community adoption. So it's not just us developing the tools, but also providing the APIs for some of the tools, and I'll talk more about this, so that you can connect some analytics to, once you get the data set out of FITBIR, that you can then run analytics on that particular, or analysis on that particular data set. But we also provide APIs to our data dictionary that supports the common data elements. And while we are more of a warehouse design where we collect data, we also have the ability to federate out, or at least we're doing that in NDAR, and we'll have that same functionality in FITBIR while we don't actually federate at the moment, though. So actually I didn't define BRICS in any way, but BRICS is a biomedical research informatics computing system, and from BRICS we've built FITBIR. But actually from BRICS we've also working with NINDS and building a Parkinson's disease biomarker informatics system, which is already collecting data and putting it into a long-term repository and collecting the data in a consistent way. And we use that. Our system has modules or bricks that go from all the way from the collecting of the data to actually then querying and mining the data. But I'll touch upon those here. Proforms, which is an electronic case report form tool. You can electronically design your forms. It interacts very closely with the data dictionary because those form questions actually have to tie to a common data element. We also allow in the data dictionary the ability to develop unique data elements that are unique to that particular researcher, so that we can also collect that data and put it into the system, and you can actually build forms for your unique data as well. That data combined with a GUID, which is a global unique identifying system. So all our data that's in our system is de-identified data. But we had to come up with a methodology, and we developed this in NDAR for assigning a ID so that that subject can be tracked over time as well as over space. In NDAR especially, but we see this also in FITBIR, that these subjects will be treated at multiple locations, and we want to collect that data regardless of where they're being treated. A long-term data repository is where the data is stored, and we have the ability to put some of the data out onto the cloud. So, for example, genomics data, which is so it can full genome sequence data can be huge, and it's not the best way just to move the data around. Sometimes you can get that data out in the cloud and then provide access to that data from the cloud so that people can run their pipelines on the data that's in the cloud. That will probably be coming out, that functionality will be coming out in the fall and spring. We also have a query tool, and then we have the MIPAV, which is the image processing tool that we also support. Right now, MIPAV is primarily used for the submission. There's a submission plugin for MIPAV to submit images into the repository. But we also are looking at how do we build a pipeline or an API that allows different image processing applications to access the data and then run it through some pipelining algorithm and then resubmit that data into the long-term repository. So this is just a different way of looking, a functional look at how we fit these pieces together. Here's the electronic case report form tool. Again, it allows you to build and collect data, or build forms and then collect data on those forms. It helps you manage your subjects, so you can say, I want this subject to come in on this date, and these 3 forms are going to be collected in his initial visit, and then if they're a 30-day visit, we have these other 3 forms, and then that data gets uploaded into the long-term repository, and then some of that data, the raw data, can also be put out into the cloud. We again have the GUID process, so it connects to the GUID, so you can attach an ID to the system that gets submitted to the repository. The data dictionary has a nice API to it that people can connect. They can download that data dictionary so that they can use. There's also an interface, just a GUI interface, so that you could search and find data elements. And again, we not only support common data elements, but we define unique data elements. A nice feature of this also is a data validation tool, so that data, while Proforms does range checking of the data and make sure that the variable names of the data that's being submitted are accurate, the validation tool, if you have your own electronic case report tool and you want to use the common data elements, excuse me, you save that data out in a CSV format, which is comma separated value. It's just a text format. That data then can you can run the validation tool locally on your machine to validate, to make sure that you're exporting the data in the the correct variable names, and those variable names are in the correct range. So if you're collecting blood pressure and you diastolic blood pressure, you've given it the proper name and that it's in the proper range. Then the data is uploaded into a particular study. And then on the other side, we have the query tool, and then the ability to download data when it's practical to download the data, so that you can download that data locally. But the query tool will allow you to say, I want to collect data from study X, Y, but not Z, and I only want data elements for age, Glasgow Coma score, and blood pressure, and get that data from those 2 studies and then download it locally. And if there's any images, you can download also that data locally. One piece that we don't have right now, and that we in the future we have to start thinking about, is data analytics. How do we process that data in some reasonable way, or provide the APIs to provide other analytic tools out there in the community to process that data. There's a little bit of work in there because you have to have access control. This is not the data. Actually, the next slide kind of hits on that. When data is submitted, it gets validated and is only available to the researcher. It's private to that researcher for the length of time defined in the policy. That researcher can also share individually to individual collaborators, but at some point, again based on policy, that data is going to move into what we call qualified access or shared access. So anyone who's been given access to the system through a data access committee, so there's a little bit of paperwork to fill out. It's fairly minimum. The bar is pretty low, but they have to have a research objective. You have to come from an accredited institution or similar. Once you got qualified access, you have access to all the shared or shared data within the system. So that while it's in the private, it gives people, while your data is private, it gives you ability to publish on that data, and it also gives you ability to do individual collaborations. But at some point, that data will be made shared, and qualified researchers will have access to that shared data. So I did want to talk about the GUID a little bit. The GUID is the Global Unique ID System. It's global with respect to FITBIR. So the process happens, we actually provide a client that you run. It's a WebStart client that runs locally on your machine. You enter PII into that application. What happens is the application then generates what we call one-way hashes, which is essentially one-way encryption on the PII, and those hashes are sent to a GUID server here at NIH. We check to see if any of those hashes match, and there's a couple there for redundancy. There's actually a few hashes that are sent to us. If one of those hashes matches, we send that hash back, or we send the GUID associated with that hash back to the researcher that then can be attached to the data. The GUID, again, is just a random set of alphanumerics. If on those original hash codes that are sent, none of them match in our database, we generate a new random number, and we return that new random number to the researcher. That data again gets attached to the de-identified data, and it eventually goes into and will be shared and then be queried and then downloaded. Data can be downloaded back out of the FITBIR system. So this is just a quick snapshot of our validation tool. Again, it runs locally at the researcher site. So if you're using your own tool to capture data, or and it's also used for the imaging validation, that you validate all your data locally. You don't submit it to us. We find their problems or their issues, and then we got to ship it, let you know what those problems. You run the validation tool locally on your machine. You get an output of all those validation errors, or if there are any validation errors, you get an output. You make those corrections, revalidate your data. Once you validate your data, it actually generates a submission ticket, and then you can actually go to submit your data into your particular study within the into the system. This is just a quick snapshot of as I mentioned earlier, we're not only supporting FITBIR, we're also supporting another data validation tool or another informatics system for the Parkinson's disease biomarker program. So we just did a snapshot from that. But they're also using the ProForms tool, which allows you to manage your subjects, collect data, manage forms, and you build your forms, and then you can collect data associated with those forms. And this is just a snapshot just to kind of show you the functionality and that we really actually do have these tools and they're being used. This is just some screenshots. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. This is a snapshot of MIPAV. Um, we have a plugin tool that's used for submitting data into FITBIR, but we also have some tools to doing DTI analysis as well as other analysis. This is an open source tool, and it can be downloaded and enhanced to meet researchers' needs, but we support all the way from reading all kinds of DICOM data, analyze, SPM, AFNI, all different kinds of formats, as well as some DTI formats, and then can be saved off in different formats, but also do some analysis. We work very closely with NINDS and their Common Data Elements effort. And this is just a screenshot of their site, but we work with not only the DTI, but the Parkinson's, as well as some of the other disease categories, and we've been working with streamlining and improving their data element effort. This is a snapshot of a screen, and you don't have to see all the detail, but of the data dictionary and the data elements associated with that with the data dictionary. So these are the data elements defined by NINDS and Common Data Elements, and I just did a search term for imaging, and you see a number of the imaging data elements for submitting data that describes an image and getting it into the system. The system handles not only getting raw data, we want to get the raw data or the de-identified DICOM data so that people could reproduce, but we also like to get result data. So if you develop a segmentation mask for an atlas, we would love to get atlas data into the data, as well as processed image of individual. We don't need all the intermediate data sets, but to get some of that processed data in there so somebody could validate their algorithm against somebody else's algorithm that's already processed the data in some way. And this is where we're going to need some help. We have probably a subset of the imaging CDEs that we're going to need, but we're going to need additional data elements, especially imaging data elements for DTI analysis, so that we can describe that DTI experiment in some way and then get that data into the system. This is just a little bit more detail. So we developed the common data elements, but from the common data elements we developed what we call form structures. And a form structure is really a list of data elements that are used to describe, in this case, just a general imaging form structure. It has a number of required data elements, but it also has a number of other data elements that we need to describe the image in some meaningful way. So when the image goes into the system, you can query it and get that data back out. So I think we have a lot of the basic common data elements for imaging, but we need to extend that and get more detailed data elements for other disease categories. So this is where some of the future work, developing the pipeline APIs for imaging, metadata, genomics. Is that data going to be out in the cloud, or some subset like genomics? Does it make sense to move genomics out in the cloud but keep imaging locally? And, as we enhance our infrastructure here at NIH to support higher bandwidth of moving data. But again, it might make sense to move genomics out in the cloud, but again, provide APIs to provide analytic support so that other tools outside can connect, get authentication, and then get data, process the data, and then resubmit data into the that really touches on, we need to further develop our imaging common data elements to better describe DTI as well as other image data sets like resting state fMRI. So that's it. That's what I had to talk about today. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's very awkward to take questions. Some questions.
So the answer to both of those questions is yes. We provide the way within our data dictionary to define unique data elements, so that if there was a specific scanner element that you wanted to capture and make sure you uploaded, you can define a unique data element. And there's a little bit of a workflow there. So we don't let anyone develop unique ones. You can develop draft ones, and then we kind of review them and say, yep, that one really makes sense, and let's make that a published unique data element so that you can get your data uploaded. And with that, because you can define unique data elements, you will be able to upload processed images, and build a form structure with those unique data elements in it, and then you can attach that form structure to the data, to the processed image, and then upload that processed data to the repository. And this is essentially what we've done in ENDAR and are doing in FITBIR also.